on old ground. Then I'd like to give the word to Sharon about LeoGen. Good evening, Sharon, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Okay, I'm going to try to get through this without taking up too much time, but it's quite a thorough update because I feel that you all deserve that, to know what's going on and where we've got to, and in fact, where we came from as well. So let me see if I can get this PowerPoint to work, first of all. Let me do that. And
yes,
that. It's working okay?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, look at that. Okay, excellent. Okay, so basically I'm going to talk a bit about what brought us to this, and talk about pedigree dog breeding in general very quickly, and then run through the objectives of the project and what we've been doing so far. So what I'm not going to go into is the specifics of the health of our breed, because I believe that that information has been well presented in previous updates. And for anybody who hasn't had a look at the 2020 paper that came out, which basically laid out all of the data that's available, it's really worth looking at that. Because we do have some serious issues, not the least of which that our founder genome equivalent is down to 2 dogs at the moment, apparently. So let's start by talking a little bit about dogs in general. And you'll have to bear with me a little bit here because my eyes aren't very good. Dogs have been around for a long time. And it's understood very well that they are the first species that was domesticated. Initially simply by being helpmates, companions, allowing us a perimeter of safety for our noisy children and so forth, but largely selected either through their own merits or through their own adaptability and our needs, but not with the kind of strict selection that is currently practiced or that is more familiar in the world of livestock breeding. Of course, all of that changed when the pedigree dog fancy came into being. And so after thousands of years, literally, of symbiotic association, 10,000 years by many accounts, within the past 150 to 200 years, a new approach arose and became fashionable, that of pure breed dogs, where we carefully selected very specific traits and excluded all others and formed breeds into closed breeding populations, kept them excluded from impure outsiders. And this is more or less how all livestock is bred, which is fair enough, except there's a fundamental golden rule in livestock breeding that pedigree dog breeders have forgotten. And I swear if you speak to any geneticist, they will say this to you. The fundamental principle which governs virtually every other form of animal husbandry is that renewed diversity within a flock comes from an injection of fresh stock from outside. And without that, your stock, your livestock, will suffer. And that's absolutely fundamental to all breeding practice, except pedigree dogs. We seem to have forgotten this. And not only is it disallowed and frowned upon, it's actually considered heresy in dog breeding. And this is a problem because when on average, only 1 puppy from a litter of 7 will be selected to breed on from, and most puppies that follow will then be sired by an estimated 5 to 10% of any generation of males. There is only one outcome from this breeding model, and that is a continual erosion of genetic diversity, leading to shorter lifespans and increased diseases, because recessive diseases have a much greater chance of coming together, which is the majority of problems that we see. And there's something else that we need to think about, and that is the public perception that is beginning to grow and gain momentum around the idea of pedigree dog breeding. And I think not just our breed, but all breeds need to start taking this much more seriously, because it does concern us and we can't simply ignore it. If we do, we will see more headlines like these. And In November of last year, there was a report that was put out by the Eurogroup for Animals, which did a review of all the legislation that's beginning to arise in Europe, and mapped the legislation on restrictions. So, for instance, we've probably all heard about the issues with in the Netherlands. I think it's the pugs that first came under scrutiny. In Norway, bulldogs, French bulldogs, and Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, and so forth. And even recently in Germany, there was a suggestion that dachshunds would be restricted. And this list is growing, and it doesn't necessarily impact us directly in Europe, but it's worth noting that in Egypt, for example, all but 10 breeds have now been outlawed. It's quite amazing. In the UK, for example, we don't see breeds being scrutinized so much, except for the Dangerous Dogs Act, but we do see the changes to the 2018 animal welfare legislation, which states very clearly, quote, breeding from animals where genotype or phenotype is likely to cause suffering to either the bitch or the offspring is going to be forbidden. And that law is currently on the books. So we're going to see more and more pressure being put on the breeding of pedigree dogs, and more questions being asked about why we continue to do what we do. I don't need to go into more detail about that. I think the fact remains plainly evident that we as a community are losing the public relations battle. And that's something that I think all breeders need to pay attention to. And so I respectfully suggest that it's in the best interest of pedigree dog breeders to not simply ignore this, but to ask ourselves, what can we do to address this? As well as the health issues that are clearly there, the lifespan reduction that we're seeing across the years and so forth. We know from the scientific evidence that our Leonbergers are also suffering from these breeding practices, and that is why we need a project like LeoGen. So we knew from the beginning that we were going to need several things. We were going to need the direct agreement and support of at least one official registry body, and preferably an FCI affiliated body, because that's the largest group that controls and governs the breeding of pedigree dogs. Because we understood that there was no point in us trying to launch a project like this if the progeny could not ultimately be used by our breeding community. We knew that we would need the backing of a significant proportion of the breed community, and we needed some direct support to be evident from at least one respected Leonberger club. We needed the endorsement and support of recognized experts from the breeding and genetics community. We knew as well that we would need a statement about the scheme from the Deutsche Club, which is the mother club of the breed. And that was not an easy thing to arrive at, but we finally got there. And we would need a sensible plan from where we're going to draw our new genetics from. It's always the first question that people ask: what breeds are you going to use? And we always came back by saying, that's not our starting point. Our starting point is, what do we need and where can we find that? And so we've been doing a lot of work looking at different breeds, sources that are not specifically breeds, and trying to put together a sensible plan. We also knew this was going to cost money and that we'd have to do fundraising, and we needed some kind of financial entity rather than just leaving it up to a group of breeders themselves to try to find the means to do this. So we needed to put together some kind of a legal entity that could enter into fundraising agreements, heads of business agreements with partner institutions, could put in grant applications and so forth. And we would need a framework to manage the flow of information, because we want this to be transparent. We've always said that we don't want to do this behind closed doors. There are other projects out there. For instance, the Bernese Mountain Dogs have a secret crossbreeding project. We think that that's actually quite dangerous. So we don't want to do that. And we're trying to be as transparent as possible with all of this. So I want to go through the timelines so that people know where this all came from and what's been achieved over the years. And really, I want to go back even before this, because as far back as 2009, there was a paper published called Pedigree Dog Breeding in the UK, published by a geneticist at Cambridge University, Professor David Sargan, and he categorically recommended that there should be open stud books to allow more frequent introduction of new genetic material into established breeds. And he said very specifically, there is no genetic reason to expect that problems in newly introduced genetic material will occur at higher rates than those in the individuals they replace. If some genetic diversity is maintained, the heterosis will tend to reduce prevalence and severity, both of introduced problems as well as previously seen one. In fact, the whole argument that, well, you don't know what you're introducing is actually false in terms of the genetic mechanics of this in the first place. In other words, he says, remember the lesson of virtually all other domestic animal breeding practices. Renewed vitality comes from outside. You need fresh blood, basically. And that was 15 years ago. So in 2013, Meetha, you may remember this, I presented an outline for a 3-team breeding project aimed at injecting additional genetic diversity into the breed at the first face-to-face meeting of the newly formed ILU Health Subcommittee on the terrace of the Amber Hotel. But obviously it was too soon and it didn't get any traction. Also in 2013, the UK Kennel Club published a statement which said the Kennel Club works with breed clubs to look at suitable outcrossing programs to widen the gene pool. This will ensure that owners benefit from the predictability of pedigree dogs, which, by the way, I think is one of our strongest remaining arguments for carrying on breeding pedigree dogs, and at the same time ensure the decline of genetic diversity in the future is prevented. When we saw that, we realized we were possibly in with a chance with the UK Kennel Club, which is the most conservative of all of them. And so there we go. In 2015, you might recall that we put out the first cut, which was later published in 2016, of a video called Safeguarding Genetic Diversity in the Leonberger Breed, which was an attempt to try to raise the concerns about the eroding genetic diversity in our breed. We brought in a population geneticist named Peter Olieok from Holland, who works with rare breeds, and we tried to introduce a new tool called mean kinship. But the most important thing we were trying to do with that video was to raise the awareness and the problem, and to introduce the tools that people needed to use, looking at inbreeding coefficients across all generations, looking at questions of kinship and so forth. And sometime in the middle of 2018, the issue came up again on social media groups. There's one dedicated to genetic diversity in Leonbergers. And there, the 3-team outcross diversity model was published once again. And it generated some interest. I think there was some interest in the States as well. There was a breeders' meeting, if I'm not mistaken. But nothing came of it. So if we go to 2020, that's when the report was published, Genomic Diversity and Population Structure in the Leonberger. And this is a paper that was written by the geneticists who have been most involved in our team: Katie Miner, Anna Letko, the genetic teams from Minnesota and Bern. Peter Olieok was involved, as well as several others. And what they did was they brought together all of the data to actually lay it out on the table. So where people said, well, you can't trust pedigree analysis alone, they did DNA analysis, and they compared it to this. So they looked at the actual molecular DNA and they compared it to the pedigree analysis. They both came up with the same figure, 30% inbreeding coefficient. That's where we are now, which is higher than a brother-sister mating. The mean kinship shows the same level of inbreeding, and it is deteriorating. It's getting worse. It's actually baked into the breed. And the problem with this is that other breeds have shown us, studies into them, that for every 10% increase in the coefficient of inbreeding, you can almost guarantee to see a correlating drop in lifespan of 1 to 2 years. So there is actually hard evidence. So it's time to think about doing something, and that's what we decided to do. So in the summer of 2021, we contacted Dr. Anna Letko and asked her if she would join us as our geneticist. And the core team for what became the LeoGen project was formed. And so the question is, well, what's happened in the 3 years since then? Like I said, we knew we'd need the backing of some portion of the Leonberger community. And so we have now established strong support with the Swiss, the Finnish, and the UK, the British Leonberger Club, the Leonberger Club of Great Britain. And we are really, really thankful for that. In fact, they have directly supported us in terms of giving us seed funding for our legal expenses to try to start the process of getting a registered charity set up. We have also received a letter from Embark, which is one of the leading, somebody would say, the best of the genetic profiling companies. And they have fantastic databases. They've made us an offer for direct support and very good rates, and a pledge also to partner with the project for the duration, because we need to track the generations. The input that we're looking for is genotypic. It's not apparent in the phenotype. In other words, you can't track it simply by selecting puppies in the nest. You have to actually look at their DNA. And so we're very grateful that Embark has taken such a strong interest in this. We also have a letter of support from Tasso Lieb, who is the director of the Institute of Genetics at the University of Bern. He's also joined our advisory committee, and they're very keen on supporting LeoGen and partnering particularly with the Swiss corner of the project. We have been, as I say, working on our candidate breeds and sources. And this has led to conversations with the breeding director of guide dogs for the blind in the UK, who have basically a breeding colony of very, very fit, orthopedically very sound, and incredibly sound temperamentally dogs for breeding guide dogs for the blind. And they're not only quite keen in offering us a potential use of their stud dogs, but are keen to introduce Leonbergers into their lines and see where that goes. And so there's an actual collaboration beginning to be discussed there. We have also, after a long period of uncertainty, which it sounds is continuing at the moment, managed to get through to the Deutsche Club during a period of some stability, and we are very grateful to have received a letter from them acknowledging this project, acknowledging the issues that we're attempting to address, and asking to be kept abreast of what goes on. So we have our letter from the Deutsche Club that we very much needed. And as I said, we've always known that we needed some kind of a legal entity. And so we have begun the process of establishing a charitable incorporated organization in the UK under the UK charity law, which is an entity that allows us to have tax-free status, to raise money, to enter into legal agreements, and to file our accounts and so forth. And finally, we were certain from the beginning that without the cooperation of the registry bodies themselves, as I said, the kennel clubs, we would be wasting our time, and there was no point in spending years creating a colony of more genetically diverse Leonbergers if no future breeder would ever be permitted to use them. And so we have been negotiating arduously with the subcommittees of the British Kennel Club, and climbed through the ranks and gained support along the way. We now have an official affix, a breeding kennel name for our dogs, which is LeoGens with a Z on the end. There's a bit of a story behind that, which I'll be happy to share afterwards, but that's what we're called now. Our puppies will be registered. And we earlier this year received a letter of authorization from the board of directors of the British Kennel Club, considering a direct proposal to them that we ask them to basically acknowledge our project, support it, and register our puppies without regard to phenotype. And this is important because in the UK, there is a system called the affix system, which is similar to some other countries, where if 3 CC awarding judges consider that the dog fits the type of the standard, then they will allow it to be registered with an asterisk next to its name as being a Leonberger. The asterisk then travels through the generations for 3 generations to tag it as of unknown parentage. They're allowing us to sidestep that. In other words, they're opening the stud book for us, because our first generation crosses are not going to look like Leonbergers. They're going to look like other things. And we need to come back to Leonbergers. But we don't want to wait until we have achieved a dog that will meet the requirements of 3 CC awarding judges before they slap that first one with an asterisk, because that's a further 3 generations before they're considered for clear breeding. And so on a meeting held on the 29th of February of this year, we received a letter that said, "I'm pleased to confirm that the board acknowledges and approves the recent recommendation from the Dog Health Group, have a clear understanding of the intricacies of the project, and have formally granted authority for progeny produced within the LeoGen project to be registered under the LeoGen's affix." So this is a huge step for us. Now, sorry, I'm running behind here a bit. Formal, there we go. So the next steps. Some of you will know, perhaps, that some of the Nordic countries are a little bit more progressive with regard to these kinds of projects. The Finnish club in particular has a format for genetic management projects of this kind. And they have a separate registry for dogs that are produced under these approved schemes. They also have a very, very comprehensive proposal form, which we have now used to submit the LeoGen project to the Finnish Kennel Club for approval, along with the support of the Finnish Leonberger Club, which we are very, again, grateful for. So we have all the pieces in place. Sanna, I believe it's fair to say that it's kind of a given that they would approve a project like this, because it does tick all the boxes. So we're waiting. It's on their agenda now to get their final approval. It should come through this summer. And when that comes through, we will have an FCI club on board, and we'll be ready basically to start moving forward. And we've already begun the discussions about how the Finnish registry and the UK registry are going to work together, because you may recall in past presentations that puppies need to be rotated between the breeders' teams, and they have to be recognized by each other's registry bodies. In terms of the Swiss team, it's taking a bit longer, but we're progressing there as well. And then we get to the next question, which is, where are our outside sources coming from? And so what I would say here is that the decision is based on a number of factors. Obviously, morphology, we don't want to go with anything that's too extremely divergent, although we've seen examples such as the bobtail boxer project that prove that type can be regained very quickly, even when going out to something as divergent as a corgi from a boxer. We're not suggesting that, by the way. We are very concerned to find the genotype contributions that we're looking for. So, for instance, you may recall me mentioning in the past that we have very, very poor mitochondrial DNA. In fact, there's only 1 haplotype in our breed on the whole. There's a second that has made an occasional appearance, but basically we have 1. We are all aware of the work that Farragen's doing with DLA haplotyping to try to preserve the few, I think it's 7 or 9 that we have in the breed. There are over 200 in dogs in general. And again, this is where we need the help of a company like Embark, because they can read the genotype and tell us where we are and what we've got, and what the puppies that we produce will have as well. So we're currently looking we have 3 breeder team model. We're currently looking at 3 types. We're putting a lot of effort right now into looking into the continental type European Landseer, which is a similar sort of breed. If you look at their morphology, other than the color, which obviously is very different. The silhouette is very similar. The build, the characteristics are very similar, although they do not have the same lineage as the traditional Newfoundland, and certainly not Saint Bernard and Pyrenean. We're not going to use the original founder breeds. I should say that right away. We're looking at going out to a completely different group, as I mentioned, the gun dog group, potentially, and it's looking quite likely that we're going to proceed with our discussions with the guide dog breeding team, because obviously they have been running their own breeding program for decades. They have generations of physically fit, long-lived dogs with outstanding temperaments, and we think that that's a very useful thing to tap into. And finally, we're looking at something much more outside of the box. We're discussing with a breeding program that is working to preserve a landrace type of nomadic flock guardian dog from the sort of steppes beyond Central Asian shepherds, beyond all the kind of flock guardian dogs that we're familiar with, to something much, much more original that, again, has been working with Embark, and there's some very good genetics available to draw on that show that they go back to some of the earliest of these types of dogs. They're not a breed, they're a landrace type. So that's what we're thinking of so far. In terms of the fundraising, we're looking at let's just say approaching the Charity Commission has got the details now, and I just spoke to our treasurer today, in fact, and they've got it for consideration. So we hope to have some news on that by the next few months. We will need to raise funding for genetic profiling, for health screening of puppies, for health screening of potential outside sources, for shipping puppies, for semen collection and chilling, for AI costs and so forth. We have received our first pledge of £5,000, which we're going to be using as matching funding to try to double it as soon as possible. We've also, just in fact, yesterday had a long conversation with one of the top canine AI centers here in the UK, who are also work in rare breeds preservation, and they're very keen on helping us as well. So we are sure we're going to get very good preferential terms from them. And we also need to build up our network of guardian homes, because we can't expect all these puppies to stay in our households. We need some uniformity in how the puppies are raised, because there's got to be selection based on some kind of common ground, some sort of level playing field. So we will be building up our guardian homes and taking that forward. We're looking at bringing in more members of our advisory group. And of course, the most important thing is we want to start breeding, hopefully by the end of this year. It's been an incredible slog to get this far. And I just want to actually, before I go to questions, say one more thing. That I believe that the reason that we've been able to convince probably the most conservative kennel club in the world, which is the now termed Royal Kennel Club in Britain, into agreeing in writing to support this project and essentially to open the stud book for us, is that they understand the significance for all breeds. Members of their influential health group have stated flatly that they see LeoGen as, quote, a flagship project, which they have called the most comprehensive outcross proposal that they have ever seen, which they feel could, quote, provide a model for all pedigree breeds to follow in future, as they strive to develop a new approach to breeding, one that focuses on long-term genetic management of the breeds, rather than continues to follow the clearly bankrupt Victorian breeding model of the closed stud book system. And I just want to add one thing on that. Last week, the Kennel Club's health department threw out a lot of their breeding testing recommendations. Any breed that registers less than 300 puppies a year in the UK, they are now not insisting on any health testing. And the reason they're giving is that genetic diversity is more important. In other words, they're getting spooked by the lack of genetic diversity in so many breeds. And it's causing a huge upheaval in the UK. So it's a real issue, and it's time for us to address it. Our main final point is we don't want to wait until we're in real trouble. This is going to be a 10 to 15-year project. So we feel, let's start now. There's no point in waiting. So